Hello YouTube, how's it going? This is the crossover and I'm back with another video. Today is going to be my big board right before the NBA draft. As of the recording of this video, it is Wednesday, so the draft is going to be happening tomorrow. So right before the draft, I wanted to release my big board, my final rankings of all these prospects that I've been discussing throughout the year and a lot of other guys in the back end of the second round that I didn't necessarily get a chance to cover this season. So I'm going to be going through my rankings of all the prospects from 1 all the way to 70. So without any further delay, let's get straight into the video. Moving on to picks 1 through 10, first up, I want to discuss Chet Holmgren, who I view as the best player in this class and who I have number 1 on my board. And that's mainly due to just his rim protection. I think that he's just such a special rim protector, even comparing him to Evan Mobley, who was a special defensive big man prospect last season. I think Mobley was a bit more versatile than Chet. However, I think Chet was the better rim protecting prospect. And that's not to say that Chet doesn't have room to grow. I think he does have some room to grow, being able to guarding out in space, but I don't think he was necessarily bad out there this season. And then on the offensive side of the floor, he's just such a versatile player with his floor spacing, with his rim running, with his passing, with his ability to handle the ball in transition. We've really seen versatility be prioritized in the 5 spot and how important it is to have, versatility out of that position in the playoffs with guys like Al Horford and Bam Adebayo, right? We've seen how important that is. So I think Chet fits the mold. And really the only question that I do have with Chet is just, will his body be able to hold up over the course of an 81-game season? That's something that we will have to see. And I'm not sure how much weight he will be able to add to his frame. I think from day one he might have to, switch between 4 and playing the 4 and 5. I think he will be able to play the 5 in certain situations, but he'll more so be a 4 early on in his rookie year. However, I expect him to grow into a full-time 5 as his career continues to develop. Number 2 on my big board is Paolo. Paolo is a guy who I had number 1 for a while. The reason why I decided to move him down is just because a bit of the inefficiencies and some of the concerns on the defensive side of the floor. However, I still have him number 2. So, that's still very good, right? But, that's not to say that I don't still like Chet. He's a very good prospect. He offers playmaking and 3-level scoring at 6'10", 250 pounds, right? There's not much to not like there. I do think the defensive side of the ball needs a good amount of work. However, I think whatever team ends up with him in the top 3 is going to get a clear potential centerpiece of an offense. And the reason why I did have Paolo over my number 3 guy, Jabari Smith is a guy who I really like. And I think the median outcome for Jabari Smith is going to be a very solid player. I think if the top 3 guys reach their median level outcome, I think Jabari Smith might be the best of these guys, but in terms of their ceiling, I think he has the lowest ceiling by far, just because Jabari isn't necessarily creating his own offense. He's not much of a playmaker for others. He's not necessarily going to, be able to break down break down his man, get by his man at will and, really put pressure on the defense, right? And I think that's what Paolo was he excelled at that despite some of his inefficiencies at Duke. So I think Paolo has the better chance to be the centerpiece of the offense of an NBA offense, while Jabari has the more likelihood of being, the better complementary piece. So if you want the complementary piece to, an already solid group of young players, you go with Jabari. And if you want, the centerpiece, you're missing like that franchise star, you need somebody to fill that role, I would go Paolo. But amongst these top 3, I think they're clearly head and shoulders the top 3 best players in this class. I know I dabbled with Shaedon Sharpe being a bit higher. I know I have Shaedon Sharpe at 4. We'll discuss him in a second, and Jaden Ivey high as well. However, upon watching film and really grinding through film the past couple weeks, I've landed on the consensus top 3 for my top 3 as well. So moving on to my 4th player, and that's Shaedon Sharpe. And despite there not being a lot of film on him, I know that he's not necessarily according to reports, he hasn't necessarily been great, in interviews. We saw that clip with Sacramento where he said, I'll give my teammates, their little shine, which is not a good look at all. And apparently he hasn't been performing great, in team workouts. However, at the end of the day, the draft is a talent grab. You're trying to get the most talented player. And, all this talk about Shaedon's attitude and this and that and this and that. I'm like, I'm sorry, man. I look at a guy 6'6", 7-foot wingspan, strong, big hands, 49-inch vertical, 3-level scorer potentially, gifted finisher, freak athlete. Like, come on, like this is just a no brainer. And the reason why, I debated between Shaden and Jaden Ivey for being 4 and 5, and the reason why I did end up landing on Sharp at 4 is just because I think there's more avenues to Sharp being, a in there. Again, the same argument that I said with the top three, comparing the median outcome for Shaden and Jaden. I think the shooting that Shaden already has puts him over the edge for Ivy. I feel like Ivy has to, for Ivy to reach, that all-star and potentially all NBA ceiling that he does possess, the shooting has to get better, right? There's concerns about the form with how low Ivy's form is, right? The defense has to improve. He has to become, that full-fledged. He has to be able to improve on the playmaking to show that he can, be the centerpiece of an offense, right? Because if he's not going to be the centerpiece of an offense and he's not going to be a great shooter, then it's kind of like, that's why I like his fit so much with Detroit. But that's neither here nor there. But Jaden has to improve on a lot of things. Where Shaden, it's just like, maybe the defense has to improve. Like, we've already seen the shooting upside with him. I just feel like Sharp has a bit more tools to succeed and really reach his upside as opposed to Jaden Ivey. And that's not saying that I don't like Jaden Ivey. I love Jaden Ivey as a prospect. He's fifth on my board, right? You're the fifth best player in this class. You're doing something right. So I really like both players, and I just landed on Shaden 4 because I think it's just more. I think it's just more likely for him to reach his upside, and Jaden 5. And that's not to say I don't like Jaden. I love Jaden. I hope my Knicks trade up for him. I would love to see him at the Garden. However, this is where I ended up with my rankings. And then we have Benedict Matherin, 6th, player who I really like, versatile 6'6" wing. I think there are some concerns with his off-ball defense as well as his ability to create his own shot. And just because the handle isn't necessarily great right now, but I think those are all things that you can improve on. He's an athletic, two-way wing. There's just not much else to talk about outside of that. And I think he has a relatively high upside, and I think there's still a lot of room for him to grow as he's still relatively young. And then number 7, I have Keegan Murray, a player who I was pretty bullish on early on in the draft process. However, as it slowly went on, he started to grow on me a lot more. I got to see him play in person. He's a guy who I really like. I've grown to really like him. Just his two-way versatility. He's just such a sound cutter, able to just. He just seems to have a knack for the ball on both sides of the floor, whether that's grabbing rebounds, whether that's grabbing offensive boards, whether that's catching passes from teammates while he's cutting that he shouldn't be able to catch, but he still gets to the ball, right? Keegan Murray is just such a sound, solid two-way player, and I think there's still room for him to continue to grow. I do understand some of the concerns with, him having a post-dominant game. However, it's not necessarily the biggest deal in the world to me, just because of he's shown that he can handle the ball a little bit and he can shoot the ball a little bit as the season has gone on. So I really like Keegan Murray here at 7. Number 8, I have Nicola Jovik. Now, this might be a surprise to some. For those of you that have been following me throughout this draft process, you guys know that I've been a Nicola Jovik fan pretty much the entire time. I had him top 5 coming into the season, and he's only 8 now. And, I really like Jovik, and I understand the concerns, right? I understand the concerns, European player, and he's a pretty bad defensive prospect right now. Not much of a rim protector, has shown some help side rim protection, but not much outside of that. Really struggles to guard out on the perimeter. But when you look at what he does on the offensive side of the floor, right, he is a 6'10" point guard. Like he's creating his own shot, moving the way 6'10" players just aren't supposed to be moving, and I just can't take that for granted. Like he's just such a special offensive player, at his size, with what he's able to do as a playmaking wizard, both in transition and in the half court, with his shooting, with his ability to create his own shot, right? These are just all things that I just really love, and those are just things that you're not supposed to see 6'10" players move like this and do the things that Nicola Jovik can do. So I really like Jovik, and in all reality, he's probably going to fall in tomorrow's draft. However, I think whatever team ends up with him will get a steal, a very talented player on the offensive side of the ball. And at number 9, I have Jalen Durant, another player that I was a bit bullish on early on in the season. However, he kind of came along to me as I watched the other big men prospect. I kind of took Jalen Durant's strengths a bit for granted, like just how good of a vertical spacer he is. He's by far the best in the class. Very good hands around the rim, very good rim protector. I do still have some concerns with his ability to guard pick and rolls. I think he definitely is a bit lost in pick and roll coverages. However, I'm buying into his strengths as a bit of a playmaker, as the best lob threat in this class, as a very good rim protector. And, I think he could be a very solid center with given proper development. And again, he's the second youngest, is the youngest player in this draft now that Leonard Miller has pulled out and has gone to G League Ignite. And at number 10, I have Malachi Brandon, my guy, my favorite player in this class. I absolutely love Malachi Brandon. I had him as a lottery pick when I made his individual scouting report. I absolutely love Malachi Brandon. I don't understand why he's not a consensus top 10 player, just given his strengths. He's 18, 19 years old, 6'5", 6'10" wingspan, just how efficient he was at every area on the court. And he's just so cerebral when you watch him out on the court. He's just moving at his own pace, gets to his spots at will, playing in a tough conference like the Big Ten, and he was still able to just do his thing. And I think he was a pretty solid defender on ball. I think his defensive concerns were a bit overblown. And Malachi is just a guy that I think is going to be a really solid bet to be a solid player at the NBA level. And again, he's so young and he still has a lot of room to grow. Moving on to picks 11 through 20. First up, I do have AJ Griffin, who was a guy who I've been a bit up and down on during this draft process. Previously on my mock draft, I did have him going 18th to the Bulls. I knew that was a bit low. Looking back on him, well, not a bit low, as I obviously moved him up 7 spots on my big board. He's a player who I've grown on, watching Banchero film and kind of seeing him, in the background. I've grown on him. I still have a lot of concerns with him defensively. However, just given his size and with the age and just, I learned from last draft season where I kind of nitpicked, a player like Scottie Barnes. I kind of nitpicked, the shooting and the handling and whatnot. I decided, AJ Griffin had, he was the best shooting player in college basketball this previous season. So I just decided, what, I'm not going to overcomplicate this. I'm just going to take it for what it is. And, he had a hell of a season. So I decided to move up AJ Griffin to 11 and is a player who has grown on me. At 12, I have Tori Easton, another one of my draft favorites, who is a guy who I really like and a guy who has apparently been performing negatively in interviews and in workouts. However, I still believe in his talent. I think he still has a lot of room to grow as a player and is a guy who I really bet on being a solid player at the NBA level, especially given his defense. And I think he's one of the best defenders in this draft class. At 13, I have Jaden Hardy, who is a guy who I know a lot of people have in the mid to late 20s, and I just don't understand why. Jaden Hardy was just such an electrifying player for the G League Ignite, and I know he struggled a lot. And even if the percentages did improve over time, I know there are still a lot of concerns with his finishing around the rim. However, just given his upside as just a three-point shot creator and just a pick and roll ball handler, I mean, his upside on the offensive side of the floor is as high as the best players in this class, in my opinion. Like, Jaden Hardy is that good. He's that talented of a ball handler and a three-point shot creator. So I really like him, and I do think he is still worth a lottery pick despite having a relatively up and down season for the G League Ignite. At 14, I do have his teammate, and that is Dyson Daniels, a player who I like, but I don't love, right? I think Dyson Daniels is a bit overrated. I've seen talk about him going 5'4", and that's utterly ridiculous to me. Dyson Daniels was the secondary ball handler for G League Ignite. He wasn't necessarily all that much of a creator in the half court. He really thrived in transition, and don't get me wrong, Dyson is an awesome defensive prospect. However, I just don't feel great, taking a guy that, a guy with Dyson Daniels' strengths so high, as I've seen a lot of people have him mocked. So as a result, I do have him 14, and I think that's a solid place for him. I think he'll end up being, a solid two-way player in the NBA. If he does hit in the NBA, he's not going to be a creator for himself in the half court, and he's going to be a secondary ball handler. And just given his limitations on the offensive side of the floor, I don't think being a top 10 pick is really warranted. And at 15, a similar scenario, I have Jeremy Sohan, a guy who I like him and Dyson Daniels, but just given Jeremy Sohan's struggles on the offensive side of the floor, specifically as a shooter, as a 3-point shooter, and at the free throw line, his form is just absolutely horrible. It just needs a lot of work, and it's kind of weird because the form is great from the mid range, but I don't know what happened with his development and his form being picture perfect from mid range, on like fadeaways and whatnot, but it's so awful from the free throw line and from the 3-point line. Excuse me, like, whatever team he ends up needs to fix his shot form right away. But if the shot does get fixed, you're looking at a very solid role player. a guy who, in my opinion, is the best help defender in this class, best weak side defender, one of the best floor generals in this class in terms of, being a communicator, helping his teammates out through, off ball actions and whatnot, directing traffic. He's awesome at that. And I think he does leave a little bit to be desired as a rim protector and as a point of attack defender, especially when guarding guards. I think that part of his game is definitely, blown out of proportion, by, the media and whatnot. However, he's a very solid player. I just don't necessarily see Jeremy Sohan as being, quite like, a top, being like worthy of like the 10th or pick or anything higher than that. I think 15 is solid range for him, and he should be a solid role player in the NBA if he does hit. At 16, I have Johnny Davis, the guard out of Wisconsin, who is a player who, I know I stated with AJ Griffin, I'm not going to overthink him, but with Johnny Davis, I just can't. I saw Johnny Davis play in person against Rutgers, and all the struggles with Johnny Davis really showed themselves in that game, with the athleticism and the inconsistencies in terms of creating separation, and you really saw all of that come to fruition against Rutgers. And it was just he was, I know Caleb McConnell was the defensive player of the year. Caleb McConnell is an awesome defender, could potentially be an NBA prospect if he does improve on his offensive game in the offseason. However, Johnny Davis just could not do anything against him. And, how much do you hold, one performance? But it's not just one performance against him. There's been multiple performances where he just struggles to create separation. And, I understand that he was kind of a one-man show in Wisconsin. However, I landed on 16 being a solid landing spot for him. And I think that whatever team does end up getting Johnny Davis playing in better space with better talent around him, I think he should be able to produce and be a solid player for whatever team does, again, end up drafting him. And at number 17, I have Ousmane Dieng, the wing out of New Zealand, or playing for the New Zealand Breakers, who is, another player that I really like. However, I think he's just a bit raw right now, and I just couldn't, take him over a lot of these other guys. I think a lot of these other guys have better chances of being, day one impact players. And, Ousmane definitely has a higher ceiling than a player like Johnny Davis, but Ousmane he's just very raw right now. And even though he did have, that month and a half where he exploded for New Zealand, and you saw, all the potential, being a 6'8" wing who could create his own shot, run the offense, be a difference maker on the defense side of the floor. Despite all that, Ousmane he's still very raw, and he's still so young that, will he be able to reach that and be that in the NBA in a much significantly more talented league? Maybe, there's a chance that he can reach it, but I think the chance for him reaching his ceiling is a bit lower compared to, some of these other guys. So that's the reason why I have Ousmane at 17. 18, Jalen Williams. My final scouting report was on Jalen Williams, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. He's a guy who, I just stated his strengths and weaknesses. However, I think his strengths are a bit overblown a bit. He's very underwhelming defensively. And not the best finisher despite the percentages. So, yeah, he's not my favorite guy. Some of the top 10 talk with him I think is absolutely absurd. So I landed on 18 being a good spot for him. I like Ousmane. I would rather bet on Ousmane hitting his ceiling, being, that two-way difference maker rather than Jalen Williams, especially with Jalen Williams is, 3-4 years older than Ousmane. So that's the reason why I landed on Jalen Williams being at 18. I have Ochai Agbaji at 19, player who I really like, a two-way impact player, was really the best player for the national championship winning Kansas Jayhawks team this previous college season, and who is a guy who I really like. However, I think the form, I love how quick of a release he has. However, I think it is a bit low. And then he's a very underwhelming finisher for being, 6'5", 210, with a 6'10" wingspan, right? Very underwhelming finisher. And that's really the reason why I have him as low as I do. However, 19 is not bad. I think that I think out of all the players that I have going in the first round, I think Ochai has one of the best bets to be a solid day one impact player on whatever team drafts him. So I hope he ends up with a playoff team, and I expect him to be, a contributor to a playoff team, hopefully when he gets drafted, and we'll find out where he gets drafted tomorrow. So yeah, at number 20, I have Bryce McGowan's player who has grown on me as well. I'm kind of buying into the shot creation that he does have. I know that he improved slightly on the defense side of the floor as the season did go on. However, just with his length and just with his finishing ability, he's just one of the most gifted finishers in this class. And I think if whatever team ends up drafting him, he's more of like a draft. Keep him in the G League. Have him work on his finishing, on his playmaking, and on his overall offensive consistency. And I think he could be an impact player in the future for whatever team drafts him. And I think he's just one of the most talented players, in the first round or amongst the top 30 players that I have on my personal big board. Moving on to picks 21 through 30. First up at 21, I do have Mark Williams, who is a center. I am a bit lower on than the consensus. All that top 13 to 15, going into the Charlotte Hornets in that range. I think that's a bit high for him. I like Mark Williams. I don't love Mark Williams. I think he does have some struggles in terms of guarding out on the perimeter. I think he was played off the court at certain times for Duke this season. However, I do like him as a rim protector. I think he's a polished finisher around the rim. Has a nice little hook shot with his right hand, nice little teardrop, nice touch around the rim overall. So I think he should be a decent player in the NBA, maybe like a backup to maybe sometimes a starting level caliber center. At 22, I have his Duke teammate Wendell Moore, who's a player I am a lot higher on than the consensus. I really like Wendell Moore as just an all-around versatile wing. He's a guy who's a 40% shooter, so was a secondary playmaker for Duke. Was not a bad rebounder for his size, was a decent defender on ball. And I think his off-ball defense could use some work, but I like what he showed on ball. So a very versatile all-around player that I think could have a day-one impact for whatever team he does end up on. At 23, I do have E.J. Liddell, the forward out of Ohio State, who's a player I really liked. Got to see him in person against my Rutgers, and he impressed. He impressed a lot, even through his film. I think Malachi Brandon was definitely the better player, but I really like E.J. Liddell and his versatility. A comparison that I do have for him is like a Grant Williams with some secondary or tertiary playmaking. That's a very good player. We saw the impact that Grant Williams just had for the Boston Celtics, who made it all the way to the finals, pushed the Warriors to Game 6. And he was a valuable player for that team. So if E.J. Liddell does pan out to be Grant Williams with some secondary or tertiary playmaking, he should be a valuable player for whatever team ends up with him for years to come. At 24, I have Kennedy Chandler, who is a player I really like. I really like Kennedy Chandler. Wasn't the biggest fan of him coming into the draft season. Wasn't too impressed with his stuff, and with FIBA. However, he definitely grew on me over the season. I think he's a very, very good defender despite his size. A good athlete, good shooter. I know the percentages aren't great and the form has some questions, but I do think he has upside to grow there, and he's a very good finisher despite his size again. And I think the shooting might hold him back in just his overall size at the NBA level. However, I really like Kennedy Chandler, and I think he's the best out of a lot of flawed point guard prospects. At 25, I have Christian Koloko, another player that I most recently did a scouting report on. Was a center I really like. I think he's clearly outside of, Durant, Chet, and Mark Williams. I think he's definitely the next best center. Really love him defensively, and I really like his ability to guard out on the perimeter. I could really see a scenario where Christian Koloko ends up being the better pro over time compared to Mark Williams. However, just offensively, he just needs a lot of work right now, and I do like the form. I think he has some upside to potentially be a floor spacer, at the very least a good free throw shooter. However, right now, he definitely, just his offensive game is just the reason why he's so low, or not necessarily so low. 25 out of 60 is not super low, but the reason why he's 25th on my big board. At 26, I have Gene Montero, the point guard out of Overtime Elite, who I think to be the most talented out of all the point guards in this class, and I think who is the guy who has the highest ceiling amongst all the point guards in this class. Just this creation. Everywhere Gene Montero's gone, he's kind of dominated, whether that be overseas against his own age group. He didn't necessarily play great against men overseas, but it is what it is, right? He's still young. He absolutely dominated in Overtime Elite against some solid competition, right? The Thompson twins, Dominic Barlow, some solid players over there, and he dominated, and he was clearly head and shoulders the best player. So I really like G. Montero. I think defensively he has a lot of issues, and I think there are a lot of parts of his game that are definitely flawed. I think the offensive game needs to be kind of honed in a little bit. However, I really, really love G. Montero's upside, and I would bet on his upside around this range in the draft. At 27, I have Tai Washington, who's a player who I was a lot higher on early on in the draft process. However, I kind of fell out of love with him. I think the finishing can be a problem. The defense, the shot creation wasn't necessarily great, although he was an elite mid-range shooter, was a good, not great playmaker. So I think there were a lot of flaws with Tai on top of the injury concerns. However, given his mid-range prowess, and just the calming presence that he did bring to this Kentucky offense, I could really see him providing value to a contending team if he did fall to this range come tomorrow's draft. At 28, I have Jake LaRavia, a player who I really love, all around versatile wing, do-it-all wing. One of the best cutters in this class. I put him in the conversation with him and Kendall Brown for the best cutters in this class. Keegan Murray is kind of like on the outside looking in amongst this group, but very good cutter, Jake LaRavia, very good shooter for his size, good playmaker, does a good job hitting cutters and whatnot, can slash a little bit, and on the defensive side of the floor, just a versatile player, can guard a multitude of positions and has some weak side rim protection. So a very solid player, all-around player. I could definitely see him carving out a career as a solid role player at the NBA level. At 29, I have Christian Braun, who's another player who I really, really like. He's a very solid role player, second best player on that Kansas team, that won the championship along with his teammate Ochai Agbaji, who we just discussed in the previous section. Christian Braun is a player who I really like, really tough-minded, 6'5", 6'6" wing, who's able to guard a multitude of positions. One day he would guard, Tiger Campbell. The next day he would guard, Jeremy Sohan. He was just that kind of versatile and that strong of a defender. He was able to guard multiple positions. Very fast, underrated athletic prowess to Christian Braun's game. Just a very solid player overall, good shooter, has some secondary playmaking as well. Could carve out a career. I really like the Pat Connaughton comparison with some secondary playmaking, some tertiary playmaking, and a better defender than Pat Connaughton. I really like that comparison for Christian Braun. And Pat Connaughton was a decent player for a championship winning Milwaukee Bucks team. So if Christian Braun can be a slightly better version of Pat Connaughton, that's an NBA player for 6 to 7 years. So that's a very solid career. And then at 30, to round out the top 30, I have Dalen Terry, a player who we talked about not too long ago in his own video. Solid defender, very good point of attack defender. Does a good job picking off passing lanes, and it's just it was just such a leader for that Arizona team that was so dominant this season. Very solid shooter, not much of a self-creator right now, but I think over time that can change. However, I think he will have to work on his form a little bit for that to happen. However, I really like Dalen Terry as just being, a solid two-way piece and a developmental piece for whatever team does end up drafting him. Moving on to picks 31 through 40. First up at 31, I do have Blake Wesley, a player who I haven't been the biggest fan of throughout this draft process. However, recently I have been, buying into Blake Wesley's strengths, with his pick and roll creation, with his athleticism, with his flashes that he has shown on the defensive side of the floor, with his finishing around the rim. And again, he's not great really at much right now. He's a really raw prospect. However, I think just given some of his strengths and just his athletic prowess, I think whatever team does end up drafting him will have to, kind of stash him, have him play in the G League, really prioritize his development in order for him to reach his upside. However, he has one of the higher upsides in this class. At 32, I really like Andrew Nembhard, who was the point guard for Gonzaga, really showed out during the the NBA Combine, really dominated there. And, upon watching more Chet Holmgren film, I really noticed how pivotal Andrew Nembhard was, such a patient pick and roll playmaker. I like his shooting. I know that's a bit of a concern, but I do like it, and I do like some flashes he has shown on the defensive side of the floor. So I think Andrew Nembhard is a relatively safe bet for becoming, a decent third guard at the NBA level. At 33, I have Vince Williams Jr., the forward out of VCU, who's a player I just talked about in my second round video, was a guy who I really like, being that two-way force that he was for VCU, being an efficient shooter from really all areas on the court, as well as being such a versatile defender, and just given how good of a shooter he is, even if he is, a senior, a bit shorter at 6'6", just given his length, with that 7-foot wingspan, I can see Vince Williams carving out a role as a solid role player at the NBA level. At 34, I have another Williams, Alondes Williams out of Wake Forest, Jake LaRavia's teammate, Alondes isn't the hottest name per se, but he's a player who I really like, a player who I can really see having an impact at the NBA level. I think he's the most talented passer in this class. I think he's a very gifted finisher, not very gifted, but a very solid point of attack defender, just given his size and strength. And he's a great athlete, highlight reel player. And Alondes Williams is a guy who I'm putting my name on as, one of the guys who's maybe not viewed the highest in the public eye. However, he's a guy who I'm really banking on having a career at the NBA level, and he's a guy who I really like. At 35, I have John Butler, the forward out of Florida State. really thin. A lot of people talk about Chet Holmgren's weight. However, Chet Holmgren makes John Butler makes Chet Holmgren look big. John Butler is extremely skinny. However, he's a very talented shooter and shot blocker. I think the weight is definitely going to need to be added onto his frame, or just strength in general, over the course of his NBA career. And again, he's more of a long-term project. However, I really like John Butler, just given his skill set. And he's definitely a long-term project, but I really like the potential and the potential upside of John Butler as a shot blocker and a floor spacer at the big man spot. 36, I had Patrick Baldwin Jr., who is a player I've kind of faltered on a little bit. And, I stated back or back when I did his individual video, I kind of said that he's kind of like a ball of clay, just given how poor of a situation he's been on, like how any team that ends up drafting him kind of just mold him into whatever kind of player they want. I still kind of feel that way with Patrick Baldwin. I think just other players just had much better seasons than him. I think are just better players than him right now. And again, he's a player that you could definitely bank on the upside and whatnot, but still, I think there are just a number of other players that have just surpassed Patrick Baldwin throughout this draft process. However, he does still have upside as a two-way floor spacing wing. At 37, I have Gabriel Procida, another player in my second round prospect video, who's a guy who I really like, and one of the better athletes in this class at 6'7", smooth shooting form, versatile defender. Not the best defender right now, but still he's shown a lot of upside on that side of the floor. So I think given his skill set and just his polish already at the age of 19, I think Gabriel Procida could be a solid bet to become an NBA contributor throughout the course of his NBA career. At 38, I have Justin Lewis, the forward out of Marquette, a player who I really like, a floor spacing a wing at 6'8". He's a bit slow. However, I do like just his skill set and just his polish. Not a bad defender right now. And, just given his tools, 6'8", with his shooting prowess, with his age, I think Justin Lewis could really become something at the NBA level given proper development. At 39, I have Kendall Brown. Now, Kendall Brown is not a player who I really like. I know I stated that back in December in January with his individual scouting report, and I still feel the same way. Just given his offensive limitations, and the shot form isn't necessarily terrible with Kendall Brown, but his reluctancy to shoot them. And I get his strengths as a point of attack defender and as a cutter, but Kendall Brown he's just not all that much of a positive on the offensive side of the floor right now for me to really warrant putting him, a lot higher on my big board. And, maybe you can say I'm a bit too low on Kendall Brown. I will hear that, and that's definitely a fair argument. However, I think this is a pretty fair placement given all of his limitations on the offensive side of the floor. And then finally, at pick 40, we have Jalen Williams, another player from my second round video who I really like. Again, we just talked about him, just such a versatile player on both sides of the floor, with his IQ and just his strengths. And, again, we talked about the versatility and how important it is at the center position. With his versatility at the center position, I would be hard pressed to imagine that Jalen Williams would not be able to carve out some sort of career at the NBA level. Moving on to picks 41 through 50. At 41, I do have Ryan Rollins, the guard out of Toledo, who is a very good shot creator, very shifty guard, does a good job creating separation, especially in the mid-range area. His three-point shot is something that he will have to work on. However, given his prowess as a mid-range shooter, I think it will translate over time. He does need to work on his finishing a little bit, as well as his point of attack defense. However, I think he does a decent job picking off passing lanes. And I think, however, if he does find a role at the NBA level, it's going to be as a spark plug for whatever team he drafts him. At 42, I do have Walker Kessler, who was a player I was much higher on early on in the draft process compared to now. I'm a bit embarrassed looking back on how high I had him. I'm not going to lie. However, he's a good rim protector. He's one of the best. He was the best rim protector in the nation, best shot blocker in the nation this previous season. Had an absurd block rate, and I think just based off that, I think he can carve out a role at the NBA level, maybe as a backup big, as a specialized has a specialized role, right? As a shot blocker, maybe some upside as a shooter, but I think he has functional problems with his shot. However, I think the best route for Walker Kessler to have an NBA career is as a backup big. At 43, I do have Jabari Walker, who is a player we talked about in my second round video, and a guy who I really like as a potential project player, very good athlete, plus tangible 6'9", plus wingspan. With the shot, it does need some work, but I I could potentially buy into it long term, especially with how versatile of a defender he is. I think he's a long-term project for whatever team drafts him, and I think that he's a well-worth investment for a team to look at in the second round. At 44, I have Marjan B Campbell, who's a player, again, I was a lot higher on early on in the draft process. However, as I moved on, continued to watch film on him, I just kind of, soured on Marjan a lot just because, again, as I stated in his video, I think it still stands true. A lot of his strengths are weaknesses at the same time, with his defense. He has good reps and very bad reps. With the shooting, good mid-range shooter, but from three-point, the shot is hit or miss. Good finisher, not a great finisher, right? I do like him as a cutter and as a potential defensive prospect. However, he is 21 and he's very raw, so he's gonna need a lot of work. But I do like Marjan as a potential, again, a player that a team could draft in the second round, kind of develop over time. I think that's the best course for Marjan to have an NBA career and kind of carve out a role as a two-way player. At 45, I do have Scottie Pittman Jr., a player who I really like, had a good showing at the NBA Combine, who had a very underrated season at Vanderbilt. Was really their only. He was a one-man army for Vanderbilt. In the loaded conference like the SEC. Good shot creator, crafty guard. Could be a floor general and has a shot of being a solid third guard for whatever NBA team ends up drafting him. At 46, I have Trevor Keels, who is a player I actually really like. I think Trevor Keels has a lot of upside as a two-way player off the bench for whatever team ends up drafting him. Showed some flashes as being a pick and roll creator, as a decent passer. I do think the shot didn't necessarily fall last season for him at Duke. However, I think it does have some upside as the form isn't bad at all. And then on the defensive side of the floor, I do like his potential as a point of attack defender, just given his size and strength. However, again, that is something that he will have to work on. Definitely a raw prospect, but I can see the avenue for Trevor Keels being a two-way player for whatever team drafts him. At 47, I have Darion Sebron, a player that we talked about in my second round video. Again, who's a guy who I really like as just a slasher. And again, pretty much every other area of his game is an area of weakness, an area that he has to improve on, just given how elite of a slasher he was and just how good of a driver. He was the best slasher in the country this previous season. And I think that, again, as I stated in my second round video, whatever team drafts him could kind of, keep him in the G League, kind of hone other parts of his game and really build a skill set around his ability to drive and create at the rim. 48, I have Hugo Besson, another player I did an individual video on, who was a teammate of Ousmane Dieng, who's a guy who I like, but I don't love. I think the defense needs a lot of work for Hugo. He kind of got played off the court and picked on a lot of times for the breakers. I think on the offensive side of the floor, the shot creation is a bit wild. I think his shot selection will have to get honed in. However, I like his potential as a potential spark plug off the bench again for whatever team ends up drafting him. At 49, I have Jordan Hall, the point forward out of St. Joseph's, a guy who I really like. I think he's a bit raw in terms of his shot creation and ball handling. However, I love the passing vision. At his size, 6'7", 6'8". Defense does need some work, but I really like his vision and potential shot creation at, again, 6'7", 6'8". I think he's, again, a potential draft and stash for whatever team ends up drafting him. And then at 50, I have Julian Champagne, the forward out of St. John's, a guy who I liked, but didn't love. The defense definitely needs to work on that end of the floor. And then on the offensive side of the floor was really a mid-range scorer, kind of a little bit of a back-to-the-basket forward. His game is a little bit outdated. However, I do like some of the scoring instincts that he did display, at that forward size. Moving on to picks 51 through 60 to kind of round out the second round of my prospects. At 51, I have Ishmael Kamagate, and he's a guy who I've seen a lot higher than most other big boards. However, I'm just not the biggest fan of him, just given his relative rawness on both sides of the floor. I do think he does have some upside as a rim protector and as a rim runner. I think he's one of the better vertical spacers vertical floor spacers in this class. However, I think he's just a bit too raw for me to have, really high up on my board, and I think he's going to be a long-term project for whatever team ends up drafting him. At 52, I have Max Christie, another player that we talked about in my second round video, who had a relatively underwhelming season at Michigan State. However, I think he showed some upside as a point of attack defender, was a decent weak side defender, and as a potential shot creator and floor spacer. I like the form. I think whenever he held his form, I think that was the big problem. I think he would let go of his shot form a little bit too quick whenever he did hold his form and kept it up high. He has a nice release, so whenever he did hold the form, it was pretty much automatic. So I like Max Christie as a potential long-term project for whatever team does end up drafting him. At 43, I have Orlando Robinson, who's a player I liked a lot more before I started really diving into film on him. He's a guy who's a good floor spacer, decent back to the basket, big. I worry about his mobility and his size on the defensive side of the floor. Not the best rim protector right now, and I think those issues are only going to be magnetized or only going to be made bigger or made or really shown at the NBA level. But I do like his potential on the offensive side of the floor. 42 Italian point guard Matteo Spagnuolo, who's a guy who I like as a shot creator, very good shooter, one of the best 3-point shooters in this class. However, I do have some concerns with his playmaking and as well as his defense. He's kind of a one-trick pony right now. However, I could see him carving out a role in the NBA level just given his 3-point shot creation at 6'4", 6'5". 55 have JD Davidson, how the mighty have fallen. He was a guy who I made a video on really early on in the draft process around December, and his draft stock has kind of plummeted. I thought he was better off coming back to Alabama. However, given some of their incoming recruits, I kind of understand the decision not to. I think he probably would have been best just transferring. But JD's I struggle to see the path for him to becoming an NBA player. I get he was a good off-ball player for Alabama this previous season. However, he's not the best of shooters. The athleticism isn't necessarily all that functional. He did have that dunk of the year on Walker Kessler early on in the season. However, outside of that, he didn't necessarily have too many jaw-dropping plays with the athleticism, and that he was a mess on the defensive side of the floor. So, JD potentially could carve out a role as an off-ball point guard. However, I just don't see it really happening. More a long-term project, if anything. And at 56, I have Peyton Watson, forward out of UCLA, guy who I really didn't like at FIBA. I really didn't understand the hype coming into the season with him. However, I think he did, even though he didn't play all that much for UCLA, I think he did kind of carve out a role as a very good defender. I think he did show some signs being, a versatile point of attack defender, being able to be a weak side rim protector, picking up passing lanes. I think he really showed a lot on the defensive side of the floor, was a threat in transition and as a playmaker. However, in the half court, his offensive game is really raw. The shooting is terrible right now. I think he does have some upside as a vertical spacer, but come on, he's like 6'8". That's not going to be his role at the NBA level. So the shot really needs to improve, but I like what he's shown in other areas of his game. So he's definitely going to be a long-term project, and I think he's worth picking up, or he's worth a team picking up a flyer on him in the late second round. And I think you can make the same argument for Dominic Barlow at 57. Similar player, right? Young, long, wiry wing who showcased, or Dominic Barlow is a bit different in Peyton Watson case. I think more of his upside comes on the offensive side of the floor with his ball handling and his shooting at 6'8", 6'9", and he was all right on the defensive side of the floor for overtime elite. Again, don't get me wrong, he was dominated, but more so like G Montero, where it's like you dominate, but you still have some flaws on you're right, just because you're just playing against inferior competition. However, I do like Dominic Barlow as a long, wiry athlete with some upside on the offensive side of the floor. And again, he's another player that I would like my team to take a flyer on in the late second round. Tyreese Martin, solid two-way guard, very, very good defender, good shooter at 6'5", 6'6", and not much. He's probably not going to project as much of a self-creator, probably just a 3-and-D player if he does carve out a role for himself. However, he's still a player that I like, and again, I might pick up as an undrafted free agent, most likely, as that seems to be his most likely outcome. Josh Minot at 59 is kind of in the Peyton Watson, Dominic Barlow range of players, right? A long, wiry athlete, young player, showed some flashes on the defensive side of the floor and as well as the offensive side of the floor. I think he's probably the best athlete, out of these three. However, I think he also had the most experience, and I think he got the most coverage just playing for Memphis. And he played a lot more than Peyton Watson this previous season. However, similar to Peyton Watson, he's just really raw right now. And again, Josh Minot is a guy who whatever team ends up drafting him is going to be taking a flyer on him in the later rounds or in the later half of the second round. And then at 60 to round out, theoretically the top 60, I have Musa Diabote, the big man out of Michigan, who was a guy who I really liked. Decent rim protector. I think he has some work to do on the offensive side of the floor. However, again, he's another player. All these players are kind of guys that you would take flyers on as project players in the later half or the later part of the second round. And I think Musa Diabote is a guy worth taking a flyer on potentially, again, also as an undrafted free agent. And finally, to round out my big board with the final 10 spots for picks 61 to 70. First up at 61, I have Keon Ellis, the guard out of Alabama, one of the best shooters in this draft, in my opinion. Very quick release, sound release. Not a bad defender either. I think he did a good job creating turnovers on the defensive side of the floor, so I think he can carve out a role for himself as a two-way player, potentially two-way floor spacer at the NBA level. But again, another player that could be an undrafted free agent target for a lot of different teams. 62, Khalifa Diop, a big man from overseas, decent rim protector, more so of a rim runner, a guy who's pretty raw, a guy who, again, more so similar to Ishmael Kamagate, where, he's a player who I like some of his strengths, but is just really raw right now, and I kind of struggle to put him any higher on my big board. 63, I have David Roddy, who is a player that I like. I like his offensive skill set with the shooting, some of the playmaking that he has shown. However, he's just out of weight. He's out of shape. He's just too big right now. I think he needs to lose a lot of weight, and we really saw that at the NBA Combine, where he was really struggling a lot of times to keep up with the pace and really beat guys off the dribble and even stay in front of a lot of guys. So I think cutting down the weight will really help him carve out a role, as I do think he has the skill set and the talent to be an NBA rotation caliber player. At 64, I have Darius Days, the wing or like big guard out of LSU, player who I like as a slasher, decent shot creator. Wasn't the biggest fan of him at LSU. I do think he left a little bit to be desired on the defensive side of the floor. However, he's a player that I could like, and I could see some teams taking a flyer on him as a UDFA. At 65, I have Kenneth Lofton, who I know some people might think this is a bit high for Kenneth Lofton, but just given his skill set, I don't expect Kenneth Lofton to be, an NBA caliber player. However, I'm not expecting most of these guys in this, at this point, 61 to 70, like I'm not expecting most of these guys to have NBA caliber careers. However, Kenneth Lofton is just so talented, so gifted, with his footwork, with his agility, especially down low in the post. Smart player, decent passer, not a terrible defender for his size. Again, there's a small chance Kenneth Lofton has an NBA caliber career, but again, he's just so talented. Maybe if he cuts down on the weight, he can make something of himself. Maybe he grows an inch or two, but I like Kenneth Lofton's skill set, and it's a shame that he was born in this era. I think if he was born 10, 15 years earlier, he would have been, a lottery pick, no question. At 66, I have my man, Ron Harper Jr., representing Rutgers, representing New Brunswick, a player who I like, a good shooter. I got to see him a lot in person this season, and is a guy who he took a lot of difficult shots, kind of had the green light. The head coach for Rutgers kind of gave him the opportunity to kind of just do whatever he wanted offensively, and he kind of took advantage of that. His percentages improved a lot from behind the arc this previous season, and I do like his potential as a shot creator. I think he's one of the better shooters in this class. However, I do think he did struggle a little bit defensively, not much of a playmaker either, and I kind of question how much that difficult shot making would translate. And again, he's not the best shooter, not the best athlete. So again, I think Ron Harper Jr. could be a solid option as UDFA again, as most of these guys in this range. 67 is Iverson Molinar, one of the best mid-range shooters in the SEC this previous season. I think him and Ty were the best, and he played for Mississippi State. Decent player. Very slithery, a guard, shifty guard, was able to very, again, as I say, slithery player, able to get to his spots a lot. Really like to utilize that snake dribble, and is a shifty guard. However, I do have some questions with his finishing, with his shooting from behind the arc, and as well as some areas of his defense. But again, I could see him as potentially being a UDFA and potentially growing and developing over time into being, a backup guard, potentially a backup spark plug off the bench. 68, I have Yannick Nioza, another overseas big, and is a guy who was projected to be, a top 20 pick coming into the season, was one of the better center prospects coming into the season. However, he didn't necessarily improve all that much overseas this previous season. Still has a lot of flaws, extremely raw on the offensive side of the floor, not the best defensive I know he's very he's very laterally agile and a very good rim protector, but outside of that, there's not much not much about his game to really like right now. And again, if he does get drafted or if he's a UDFA, he's a long-term project to become anything at the NBA level. 69 is Tevin Brown, the guard out of Murray State, a guy who I like but don't love. I like his potential. I like the shot creation that he showed for Murray State, being the centerpiece of that offense. I think the shooting is a little bit of a question for me, and I like the defense, didn't love it. A guy who I don't expect to get drafted. I think, again, it could be another one of these solid UDFA options. And then finally, at pick 70, to round out my big board, I have Trevion Williams, the center out of Purdue, a guy who I really love his passing and just his post skill set, or his skill set in the post is just really unmatched. His turnarounds and whatnot, all with his right hand. But the reason why he's so low is just because he's pretty much a one-hand only player. And the defense is just really bad, can't shoot the ball. So I really struggle to see him carving out a role in today's NBA, but just given how strong his strengths are, I think that he deserved a spot on my big board. And that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think about my big board in the comment section. Let me know what you guys think about my rankings of players, what you guys agree with, what you guys disagree with. And yeah, I mean, that's the end of the video. And not only with that, but that kind of concludes my 2022 draft work. I'm really proud of all the work that I put in this season, this draft process. This was my first draft process, full-fledged, like working full-time on it and on YouTube as well. I enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun doing this. I hope to improve a lot, especially with the video quality and whatnot. I have a lot of big plans coming for the channel in the near future, and as well as for next draft cycle. So again, I'm just thankful for all the support that I've received. We started this channel pretty much a year ago. Yesterday was my birthday. Last year, on this day, I got my mic, decided to sit down, work on my channel and whatnot. Work on the frameworks of it. And I'm just super thankful, super blessed for all the support that I received. I've received almost 350 subs later, thousands of views later. I'm just so blessed, so thankful for all the support I've received. I had a couple of challenging times this year going through college, my first year in college and whatnot. So be able to not only keep up with school, but also work on the channel and keep up with the draft process. It was a lot of fun. And again, as I stated, I have a lot of things coming for the channel for the next draft process, and I have some cool videos coming in the summer. So I'm really thankful, and this draft will always hold a special place for really being in my heart, for really being my first full-on draft process. So aside from that, I'm gonna record my thoughts for the Knicks draft tomorrow. You guys know that's my favorite team, so it's gonna kind of be a yearly thing for me. I did it last year too. I kind of recorded my thoughts on the Knicks draft the day of the draft, and then probably within the next 3 to 4 days after the draft, I'll kind of give my thoughts on the overall draft and certain players in certain situations or players, or some early winners or losers. So again, yeah, that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all the support I've received. And please subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have subscribed, please share the video with a friend. I want to keep growing the channel, keep growing the community. And again, yeah, that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and have a blessed day and take care. Peace.